Hi, my name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner, and I'm running to be Oregon's next Secretary of State. Welcome to another series of the Oregon Voices Roundtable, where it's an opportunity to speak with community leaders from across our state about some of the issues that folks are facing here in Oregon, and making sure that voices are being heard. I talk a lot about wanting to bring accountable government, improve government accountability. And what that means is really listening and understanding the challenges that we're facing, not just on a statewide level, but individual communities throughout our state are facing. And so today we're going to be focused on East County. For those of us who don't live in the metro area, I'm talking about East Multnomah County, but we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of using the nomenclature East County. But really excited to welcome some very special guests. Councilmember Mario Palmero, thank you so much. Dr. Mayra Gomez, thanks for joining. And also Nadia Manuylidi, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Just to say, Eddie Morales was going to join us at the last minute. He wasn't able to. So Eddie, if you're watching, good to join us. Thanks for joining us this way. And we'll look forward to you being a part of another Oregon Voices Roundtable as you have been in the past. So thank you for that. So our format today is going to give a little bit about our respective backgrounds, and then answer a few key questions about talking about some of the things that are unique to East County, some of the challenges that communities are facing, and then talk about how communities are responding now during COVID-19, this pandemic. And then what does accountable government look like moving forward? What are some of the things, the voices that aren't being heard or the issues that aren't being addressed, that when we talk about equitable and safe and accountable government, what does that mean specifically to folks in East County? So again, all of you, really delighted to have you as part of a conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jamie.
So let's just, and actually, why don't we start out, Mario, will you start out with a bit of your background, and we'll run through, and I'll wrap it up at the end with a little bit of my background as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me here. I am a 7-year city councilman for the city of Gresham. I'm the first Latino city councilman in the city of Gresham. It's been hard getting into office. You know, East County is just a mixture of diversity of just different groups of people. They speak of, I think, 85 different languages in Rockwood and Gresham itself, 85 different languages. So very diverse, very proud. We're a very hardworking community, but it's been difficult living in East County just due to the lack of resources and lack of attention from government. And I got into office, like many others in my counterparts here in East County, as well as some of the school board members, to make a change, to make a difference, to improve the quality of life here in East County. So that's what I've been doing before the COVID-19, and that's what I'm doing now, and I will continue to do this after COVID.
Well, thank you for that work. And 85 line, I mean, just right there, I mean, talking about elections, you're talking about government services, it underscores that issue. I know also you've worked as part of the Gresham Task Force on Homelessness, the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, Join, and citizen engagement. So thanks for all that work as well. Yeah. Dr. Gomez, could you please introduce yourself, give a bit about your background so folks have a better sense of the work you're doing. And
I'm the board chair for the Gresham Barlow School District. I grew up in North Portland. I graduated from Roosevelt High School, so go Riders. And I was a teacher at Gresham High School. I was a teacher there for 6 years before going into school administration. So I've worked at Gresham School District. I've worked for the Reno School District, and I've worked for the Centennial School District. So I'm very familiar with the families in the community here in East Multnomah County. I also lived in Rockwood for a very long time. So I'm familiar with the issues that Mario just described. We are a very diverse community, racially and language and culture. And we have been trying to bring services out here. We are very aware of the needs. Our community partners like ERCO, like Programa Hispano, they all know what our needs are. They all know also what our assets are. I don't know if the government always knows that we're here and what we're here for and what we represent.
Well, thank you so much for that, for all your work doing. And what you're getting to right now is government accountability. And so I look forward to this conversation specifically about that. I also want to say, as the daughter of a retired teacher, and in this time of COVID-19 with distance learning and so many parents having to essentially teach their kids at home, I think the level of appreciation is going through the roof of folks for our educators. So really appreciate that background and that experience as well. Nadia, could you please share some of your background as well and all the great work you've been doing with our diverse communities?
Hi, yes. My name is Nadia, and I've immigrated to the United States 22 years ago, and I've lived in Rockwood for the last 21 years. So my parents bought a house, and we've stayed here since. And I've seen how Rockwood changed. I've seen the good and the bad, and how it grew and expanded in terms of diversity. Because when I first went to Centennial High School back in '99, there was no ESL program, no EL, nothing like that. And now it's everywhere. So the community is growing and it's changing. And those needs need to be not only noticed, but also addressed, and not in a way where we count, for example, Slavic people as white people without really going into the details what it means to be an immigrant of white collar without any services directly addressing those needs. I've worked as an interpreter for the IRCO, which is Immigrant and Refugee Organization here in Portland. And I also work for the Oregon Self-Sufficiency, where I do a lot of work with Russian-speaking population.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really interested to hear some of your thoughts in that specific regard of experience with a community that sometimes is not seen at the immigrant community, that is not seen and understood in terms of some of the specific challenges and language barriers and some of the other things that folks are Slavic, our Russian speaking, our Slavic communities are facing here in Oregon. In terms of my background, I actually grew up in the Midwest, in East Africa and Southern Oregon. I'm an Ashland High graduate, so I got to give a shout out to the Grizzlies. My aunt who lives down in Ashland actually just recently took a picture of a bear walk through, and it technically was a black bear, but I was like, wow, a true Ashland Grizzly walking through town. But I got my background, my degrees in engineering and planning. Before entering public service, the war actually in Bosnia had just ended, and I wanted to work over and commit myself to service, but I had come out as a young adult, and so back in the day, being in the military was not an option if you were an out member of the LGBTQ community. So I worked for a humanitarian organization, the International Rescue Committee, which was actually established back in the 40s, trying to get Jews out of Nazi Germany. But it's a non-sectarian organization that works in emergency relief overseas and does refugee resettlement here in the States. So I managed their reconstruction projects in Bosnia and then later in Kosovo, repairing schools and hospitals. And then when I wanted to come back to the States, they asked me to run their refugee resettlement office in the Bay Area. So again, the work you're doing, Nadia, I work with colleagues who did that work, and it's so incredibly important and valuable, helping people become self-sufficient, getting access to and understanding access to government agencies, also becoming citizens, going through the naturalization process, which is really key, and understanding barriers. Culturally appropriate means not just your idea of culturally appropriate, means going to a place where people are at and making that connection there. And I think that's what's been missing a lot when we think about equity and think about access to government throughout our models. I also served, I've been in elected office for 9 years. I served for 8 years on the Santa Clara City Council, which is a city in Silicon Valley, about 120,000. So very urban, very sophisticated in many ways. I also now serve on the Jefferson County Education Service District Board here in Central Oregon. So both, a very rural area, but some similar and some different, also very diverse community here in Central Oregon. In the council, I served in the audit committee and a lot of regional committees as well. So some of the work that is the Secretary of State responsible for, having done some of that work and having those partnerships, not just here in Oregon, but also throughout the region, is, I think, really key. When I came back home to Oregon, got my law degree from the U of O, focused on natural resource, water law, and Indian law. And all of those things are important to really understand our natural resources. So worked as a city manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, worked on the Klamath Water case before running for Congress in 2018 against Greg Walden. So in Southern, Central, and Eastern Oregon, building up those partnerships. And what I found time and time again is when we show up and listen. There's so many issues, things we can work on together, and things I've heard you say as well. And Mayra, you were saying that as well. So this is why, for me, it's a real focus on working together. How do we build better government? How do we bring people together to solve our problems? That's really where it's at. And I really appreciate all the work you've done, all three of you at both the local level, but at the regional level, to bring folks together and do that important work. And so I'm a natural resource attorney, live in Central Oregon with my wife, and also serve not just on the Jefferson County ESD, but also on OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So when we talk about, and this thing about Secretary of State, I always like to give just a little mini primer, just really quick, just so people understand the role, because it's a really important role for our state. So that Secretary of State essentially ensures that voices are heard and government is accountable, but oversees over 200 staff and oversees several divisions in elections and audits, corporations, which is registering our businesses, in the state archives, is a member of the State Board of Education, the State Land Board, and is also the backstop to the governor and the backstop for redistricting. And now the realities of live streaming, no problem. And so those roles are already really key. And so specific again to today's conversation is going to be around elections, how do we get voices heard, because our vote is our voice, and audits, how is government accountable? And so those are the things I wanted to really tie into to our conversation today. But let's get back to focus on the location, the area we're talking about, East County, the eastern part of Multnomah County. Yeah. And let me just start with you, Mario, and then Dr. Gomez and Nadia also. If you could talk about what is something that folks outside of East County, what is something that people don't really get about or may not understand about East County, and also just geographically, what are we talking about when we're talking about East County?
Dr. Gomez, would you like to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about East County. We're talking about a community that is growing. Every day is growing, and we're affordable not by design. Many of the apartments are affordable not by design, but by on accident. In other words, we don't have the highest grade of apartments, highest level of housing that we should. We're working hard to make that change. But here in East County, we have an influx of gentrification that happened in Portland. We have a growing African American community, which is wonderful. And we have a growing Slavic community. We have a growing Asian community. And in terms of getting the vote out, I mean, historically, I think that many groups felt that their voices were not being heard, so they did not vote in the past. We're starting to change that now with the help of Councilor Eddie Morales and East County Rising. We've been getting the message out there that voting is important, but trust is also important. The Secretary of State position is a position of, we have to be able to trust whoever is there. And I think, Jamie, you are, with your background, are wonderful at that. And the fact that you're having this conversation kind of builds on that trust. And that is important to many in my community, as well as many in the African American community, Slavic, and the Asian community, especially now in the Asian community, where we are hearing that there's a lot of animosity towards the Asian community. Maybe it's because of what our president said about this COVID-19, calling it the Asian flu. But there's been a lot of just unnecessary things going on in our community that should not be happening. In terms of resources, we need more resources out here in East County. The state does a wonderful job of getting resources out into the communities that need it, but we don't have a DHS office in East County. We don't have a domestic violence center in East County. We need those programs out here.
Thank you. Dr. Gomez.
Yeah, everything that Mario said, east of 82nd J District, that community, our Asian community becoming more empowered and making themselves heard as well. And then like Mario mentioned, the gentrification coming over to just all of our communities coming over to East County, my family being one of them. I remember when I started teaching at Gresham High School, I was calling roll and there was a name that looked very familiar to me. It was a student that I had when I was working in North Portland, whose family had also moved. to East County. It was a perfect example of how we were being pushed out of the communities we grew up in over to East County, where our parents could still afford a living, could still afford housing. And I've seen that as a resident and as a teacher with my students, with the families I work with. And as Mario mentioned, the services, one of the few community-based organizations out here, Programa Hispano, they provide culturally responsive domestic violence survivors with services, and our families, connecting them with sustainability services, rental assistance, utility assistance, working with our migrant community out in Troutdale. So those are all services that community-based organizations have to provide, because the government isn't, the city isn't. So we have to, our communities are empowering themselves to provide those services for each other. And you can see ERCO collaborating with other community-based organizations, Programa Hispano seeking out other community-based organizations. So we are working together to serve our communities where the government isn't. And that's who we are. We're resilient like that. We work together to serve our families and to serve our younger generations.
And how are the resources? Are they just coming from, for the community-based organizations, how are they getting resources from outside, or is it folks within the community just having to come up with it and provide that support?
Grants, we apply for grants. Department of Justice provides some grants. Multnomah County provides partial grants. Maybe Nadia can mention about ERCOS, but it's a lot of grant-based and donors-based.
Yeah. One of the things, after I was still in the Bay Area, when I stopped working for IRC, I was noting that a lot of folks, when they would come through a refugee program, they would get resources for a couple months and then would no longer have access to that base of resources. But then, of course, that's when really a lot of the challenges kick in with families on all sorts of levels. And so one of the things that I developed a pilot project, and then it ended up being expanded statewide to do capacity building for organizations, community-based organizations, because the whole idea was, some of the groups that I was working with, they couldn't get grants like you were talking about because they couldn't pass an audit. So we provided training and development for boards and for staff so that they would be able to get those resources and provide resources to the community. And that's also that partnership piece, I think, is so important, working with government. Yes, resourcing organizations who are doing this really important work, but also reaching out, because that's the level of expertise and that's the bridge of trust right there. And in terms of my experience, I think is really important. Nadia, can you also weigh in on this in terms of East County? What are some of the perhaps some of the issues of the community or things that are not being seen or heard for folks in East County?
Sure, yes. I do want to make a comment about the availability of the resources. A lot of times the community isn't even aware that there is such a grant, or there is such a, helping hand, so to speak. A lot of times they go to their, for example, religious leaders, and they ask for help from them. And then the church, their own church, helps them with whatever it is that they need help with. They are not even aware that there is such organization as, for example, human resources or IRCO that could help not only with the first initial arrival, but also later on with, for example, language classes. Folks don't know that those resources are even available to start with. And as someone who works for self-sufficiency, I can also tell you that when refugees first arrive in a country, they are provided with assistance for the first 8 months. And I don't know who decided on that number, but I don't think 8 months is enough for anybody to accumulate, not only to a whole new country, language, culture, everything, but also find a job, be stable, and be able to support themselves within the first 8 months. It's just not possible. And on top of that, a lot of workers are not doing their job the way they're supposed to. I have an example where I have 2 different workers working with refugees, and one always was available for her clients. I shouldn't even say her or him, but she provided them with all the resources that she came across. She reached out to them, she text messaged them. She was amazing. And on the other hand, a co-worker of hers, the very bare minimum. And if somebody tried to reach out to that coworker, good luck if he turned their calls back or anything like that. So there is a lot of different aspects that come into this scenario. And resources, yes, it's good to have resources, but it's also good to have the information out about those resources.
That's such an important point. You talk about the 8 months, and I recall when I was working in refugee resettlement, it was actually 3 months unless people signed up for what was called the matching grant program, and then it was 8 months. But even 3 months, I mean, to your point, someone, their whole lives have been overturned. They sometimes had to flee just at a moment's notice, showing up in a new country, language barriers, cultural barriers, all those things, and then to get on your feet and self-sufficient in 3 months in a country where there's, it's challenging. There's so many challenges. Housing, I mean, there's just all these amazing challenges that people are facing. So how do we make that transition? How do we become accountable? I will say, because some people will hear this, the first part of this conversation, say, oh, okay, then why are we even bringing refugees in? Well, other than the kind of moral responsibility and that obligation for our basic humanity, I would give an example of someone, a big company in the metro area is actually Intel. Well, Intel was co-founded by Andy Grove, who was a refugee from Hungary. And I know this because he actually came through IRC, the organization I work for, and I met him at one point, and he was very committed to making sure, helping that next generation. So folks who come in who are doing really important work, also creating and building our economy. I'll also say, actually, the headquarters of Intel is in the city where I used to serve on the council. So all these relationships and these resources, who we are as a nation, and our economic engine is very driven by the resiliency and the strength we see in folks who are becoming Americans. So that's a key point. I think the other piece that you touched on, Nadia, that I really appreciate is the sense of, I would almost like to say that getting the information out. I know a lot of folks who work in government, and when I worked in government, I had a lot of pride in my work. But you've got to get kind of outside of the building and outside of your little comfort zone and really connect with the community. And that's where those are some of those opportunities for improvement that I'm really seeing. Mario and I were talking about one point about not just sitting in Salem, but actually getting out and traveling around the community and also having resources available, because to get to that point of making sure people know resources are available, making sure that those partnerships are being developed. You can't sit in an ivory tower and have that happen. You have to actually get out and actually connect with folks, and that's a key piece. And work with those community-based organizations, and sometimes they're faith communities as well. I mean, while I believe in the separation of church and state and a lot of our politics, but we just recognize that sometimes that go-to place of trust for some folks is their faith community. So those relationships are all really important. Can you talk a bit about, and Dr. Gomez, we can start with you and then rotate through this time now, the pandemic, COVID-19. There's tremendous challenges that we're facing across the world. But what are some of the specific challenges that folks are facing in East County that really rise to the top in your mind, and things that you think people are really most struggling with right now?
In terms of education, we've seen that our schools are the hubs, the central to providing for our families, not just in education, but we've seen with meals, we've seen with the wraparound services that our schools provide. So we've seen how essential schools are, and unfortunately, they're not of high value for everyone, right? It's like we're the first ones to get cuts, we're the first ones to face. To struggle when there is a recession, right? Even though we have seen yet again that we are essential, that our schools are essential to our kids, to our families, and we've seen that lack of internet, just having our families connected, that has been such a big challenge right now. In assuming that every teacher, that every educator has access to internet at home. We've seen that many of our families don't have internet either. Our students don't have devices to be able to participate in this distance learning, right? It was something that our teachers were so ready to jump in and support our students in every way they've been able to, but there's only so much they can do when the resources are not there, when the infrastructure is not there, right? And when we have large corporations who are not willing to support us and who are not willing to help our students in a time of need, even though we keep their businesses going. So that's been a big challenge. Language, as Nadia mentioned earlier, is also a challenge. We have different languages spoken in our communities. And even though our school districts have done a great job in translating everything, that takes time, right? So non-English speaking families are not the first ones to always receive the information because it takes time to translate everything. And also the literacy, digital literacy, not all of our families are familiar with connecting to internet and navigating Google Classroom and all of those things that even our teachers were not familiar with. And now we're expecting parents to do it. So that's been a big challenge. And we've always been aware of the opportunity gaps that exist in education, but now those gaps are going to widen. We're gonna see them widening. We know that. We know that our English language learners are losing out right now in education. We know that our parents who are still working outside of the home are not able to support their kids at home as a teacher would. And even those of us who are teachers, I'm a trained teacher and I'm having a hard time with 2 kids at home. So those are challenges that we know we're going to be ready for this summer and into the fall. We know that we have to be ready for that. How do we prepare? Who knows? We're working on it, but we know that we're going to need to support our kids and our families more than ever.
That's such a huge issue. We're also seeing that here in Central Oregon, and with so in Jefferson County, where I serve on the ESD, our largest school is Madras High School, and the demographics of Madras High are roughly a third tribal, a third Latinx, and a third Caucasian, and especially kids from who are on the Warm Springs Reservation, not having internet access to some areas, also not having, there's socioeconomic differences we're sometimes seeing across demographics. And it's not a clear line, but some generalities are coming up where we're seeing some real barriers and real gaps. And so, yeah, I think this is something that we're seeing across our state. We've been fortunate in that we've been able to provide lunches to kids. So our school buses drive kind of in reverse and drop off lunches, but the access to the internet and access to those resources, we just simply don't have. And I will say, I was mentioning this to Mario yesterday, is that I was really struck when I started spending more time last year in the Portland metro area and talking to folks from different community-based organizations around the metro area, just how much of a gap there is even in the metro area. When I think about internet access, what I would typically think about is saying, well, in the rural areas, we don't have access, and because we're rural, we don't have it out here. But it's really, I've been struck by how much of an issue it is really across our state. And it's socioeconomic. It's, the point that you raised, I think we were talking before about the company having a company make some offer of certain deals that sound good, but if you can't access that and can't get those resources, it's pretty meaningless. So these challenges and having a better understanding of these challenges was really, I mean, that's what equity and accessibility and accountability is about. So it's not one person's idea of, okay, we'll kind of throw this project out or throw this opportunity out. If you can't take advantage of it, it's meaningless. And I think that's where we're seeing some of those gaps.
And I do want to recognize that all of our school staff, from classified staff in the cafeteria all the way to our superintendents, have been working so hard in continuing to serve our students and making sure that all of our students are learning, going beyond their resources. Like, we have people delivering meals to homes for parents who don't have transportation, or if kids are staying home alone, making sure that those kids are fed, and making photocopies so that kids have something to learn from at home who don't have devices or didn't have internet. Just they're being creative. I mean, taking school buses to apartment complexes to be the hotspots, so that kids have internet. Like, just being creative to make sure that our kids have everything that they need.
Well, and then you also mentioned some of our educators who also are parents, and having to both do the distance learning, be working full time, and be trying to take care of their kids as well. I was talking to one teacher, and it was, I didn't know how she was doing it. And there's enough stress on folks right now, but it's just been really, striking. And so, much respect to all those who are getting through it and helping us through this time, but it's really a challenging time. And looking forward, now that we know this, and part of what COVID-19 has done is, we hadn't anticipated it. So there's some new things we're learning, but there were things, come on, we already knew. And so it's just underscoring those things. And we talk about a resilient community, resilient economy, resilient and accountable government. We can no longer turn a blind eye to some of these things that we're learning right now. And I think that's really key. Nadia, what are some of the things you're seeing about impacts of COVID-19, maybe in the Russian speaking or Slavic community, or even in East County in general?
You know, a lot of immigrants from Russia, they don't, or former Soviet Union republics, I should say, they don't even speak English, and they rely on those sources that speak their language for the information. And how do we know whether those sources provide correct information or not? We don't have any oversee as to what kind of information is being provided. That's number one. Of course, I'm not saying that the information is wrong or anything like that, but if someone starts something that isn't true and it just spreads like a wildfire and everyone acts out on it because they don't speak any English to even verify the information that's being, you know, shared, that is a challenge. That is a big challenge. And I have to give you some recognition in being able to have flyers in different languages addressing those communities and reaching out to those communities. And I think that's what's important. When something happens and the information has to be provided, it doesn't have to be in just 2-3 languages, you know, English, Spanish, the most spoken ones. We have to recognize, like Mayra was saying earlier, we have over 85 different languages here in Rockwood, in East County. And how do we know who knows what and what they know about the pandemic and what kind of safety measurements they're taking, and if they even know to call a doctor if they have a cough? We don't know that. And that's something that is that I've been thinking about. And to talk about education and what Mayra was saying a little earlier, another challenge for those immigrant families, if they don't have internet access and they don't speak English, they don't read English, how do they know what to do? That's another question, because I understand that when they come to school, they have those special classes where they go and they have a routine and they follow with the routine and they know what their day is going to look like. A lot of immigrants, especially from, I think it's Southeast Asia, don't quote me on it, I don't know for sure, but from my experience, they don't even have the education themselves, the parents themselves, they wouldn't be able to guide their children, let alone in English language. You know, it just shows how disorganized the community, the government is, and how we do not see beyond ourselves in a way. You know, we are lucky, we're fortunate to be speaking English and to understand what's going on. Yeah. Not everyone is in the same boat as us.
Yeah, but that's such a key point of that mentality and that starting point. If your assumption is that everyone speaks English and everyone has the same background, everyone uses the same acronyms, then you can use that, and that's your sense of communication. But this sense of an equity lens, where you're starting from, and also trying to say, if you're trying to communicate with someone, communication is about getting an idea from you to them. It's not yelling louder in English if they don't speak English. And to your point, Nadia, I appreciate this. When I worked in Bosnia and Kosovo, so a lot of folks are more of Slavic backgrounds, and my family's been in this country for about 5 generations, but the breakdown from my background is a part Scottish and part Slavic. It was Polish. And so for some reason, I guess I look Slavic enough. So when I was in Bosnia, people would come up to me and start talking to me, and they think I was incredibly rude because I was not responding. And that sense, I mean, so it was that flip side of what I know folks are experiencing, the exact experience you're talking about here in Oregon, where if someone sees someone that's white and can make an assumption that they speak English, and then so speaking to them and not having that response, or just saying, hey, I gave you this information, I gave you a flyer, you know, it's up to you now. Why don't you respond? Those gaps, I was talking to a friend of mine who's serves on the Hermiston City Council, and he was talking about also essential workers, farm workers, and some of the challenges of getting access to information. Folks, especially who had no choice but to get out and work, or forced to go out and work. But if they didn't have access to information about COVID-19, how could they keep safe? And then how could they keep their families safe? And that sense of basic responsibility of government to make sure we're keeping folks safe. And I give a lot of credit to our governor and folks who are working right now to do that work. But I think what we've missed is not having, if someone hasn't had that personal experience, that lived experience, it might just not make sense. And for folks, you know, and I know I'm preaching the converted now, but folks who have that experience, it's just so obvious you have to do that. And it's not, I don't think it's unintentional, but I think it's a perspective that we must have for government to be accountable. And that's when I'm talking about accountable government. I'm not trying to beat folks up and say they're willfully not trying to do that. It's just a lack of understanding about what needs to be done to bridge that divide and to make sure those things those resources are available. And then to another point you raised, and I know Mario, you raised this earlier, is part of the impact of COVID-19 is also, of course, the attacks we're seeing on our Asian American communities and some of the ignorance and misnomers about who is responsible. We're all getting hurt by COVID-19 right now, but blaming people and attacking people, it's horrific. And hate crimes have risen dramatically here in Oregon and really across the country. And that's something that we need to root out the ignorance that's behind that, and then also make sure we're protecting our communities, which is, and I just, and sorry, Mario, I'm jumping ahead of you. I also want to ask you the same question about our response to COVID-19, but that's, Nadia raised that point, and I think it's just such an important point to raise.
No, it is. It is a very important point to raise. I mean, for me, another concern is our economy, our small businesses. I mean, here in Gresham and East County, we sent out a stimulus package. We gave money to businesses to help them keep their doors open and help them through this crisis, but it's not enough. And I know they're receiving money, people are receiving money from the federal government, but that's not enough. Businesses are going to close down, and some of them we're not going to ever see open again, and that's a shame. But also, when we start coming out of this epidemic, we've had a history of not receiving the resources, the money, the assistance that we need in East County, and things are going to change. In the post-COVID community in society, I want East County to not have that past mistake repeat itself. I want East County to have an opportunity, just an opportunity to receive the same resources the West Side does as they do in the East Side. And this is why it's so important that we vote. That it doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what language you speak, that you vote, because it is going to be important who's going to be in charge and how this process is going to take place, how this is going to be equitable. That's to me the most important aspect. Now, looking forward, post COVID-19 is, are we going to have the right politicians, the right leaders in place to make this happen, to make this work, to change or to improve the quality of life for not just East County, but Oregon.
Well, to that point, I think it's so important to know what you don't know, and then bring folks around the table and have those conversations, so that our leadership both reflects our communities, but also has an understanding of, and when you don't know, bring folks in who have that expertise, because that's we're missing that right now. And I say that with great appreciation and respect for all those who are working so hard to serve our communities, but we know we're falling short. And that's one of those areas where I think through equity audits, where we're looking at what's being missed and where are we falling short. And some folks, they'll think, well, equity is about fairness. It's absolutely about fairness. But some folks will, there's a little, there's a graphic of kids of all different heights standing behind a fence. And so if you're trying to help that kid see over the fence, the tall kid doesn't need a box to stand on. The little kid maybe need 2 boxes to stand on. Or for folks who like more of the sports analogy or running analogy, I think about like a 100-meter race, where some kids start at the 50-meter line, some kids start at the 100-meter line, and some kids start at the 150-meter line. And if our goal is to get all those kids across the finish line, if our goal is to get all those kids they can see above the fence, we have to see what the gap is and address it. That's fairness. And when there's a language barrier, when there's challenges, socioeconomic challenge, when there's lack of access to resources, we work together with communities. I mean, the thing that I started out in public service because my mom challenged me when I was a young age. So she said, always leave a place better than you found it. Yeah. But I've stayed because I just admire the people I work with. I mean, you see resiliency and you see strength of character and you see hard work, and it's something that inspires me. So I love this work, and I love working with folks who get the job done, who see there's a challenge and think, okay, that means we gotta get it done. And that's something that I think is, we're not there yet in government. And again, it doesn't take away from it, doesn't disrespect those doing work, but we're not doing the full job at this point. Yeah. Other thoughts on what accountable and equitable and safe government looks like for East County going forward post COVID-19?
I just want to follow up with what Mario said about voting, that those of us who are privileged to vote, and those of us who are bilingual or multilingual, it is also our responsibility, our moral responsibility, to speak up and to represent those who cannot. We've seen also through this situation that our immigrant workers, our farm workers, people who work in nurseries, canneries, who are feeding us, did not qualify, were not provided any type of stimulus funds or any type of governmental assistance, yet they're the ones who are out there exposing themselves to being infected and to having their health compromised. And they're still there.
And paying taxes. That's that misnomer. That's what really makes me angry, because people will, they'll get into this argument about, well, depending on documentation or whatever. It's like, no, if you're working, you're paying taxes. There's, even if you don't have a social security card, there's an employment ID number you get, and you pay taxes. So then to be told, okay, we need you right now, it's a dangerous time for all of us, we need to eat, our families need to eat, so you go off, you get yourself at risk, we're not going to provide you with the PPE you need, we're not going to provide you with the information you need, we still need you to go out and pick food so our families can eat, but now we're going to not give you access to the resources you need. When we're talking about our heroes, this includes our heroes. Our heroes right now are the folks who are providing for our personal health, our doctors and our nurses, our janitors who are keeping things clean, and the folks putting food on our table. And that starts with picking the fruit. And so that full piece, and sorry, you just got me going on this one, but and we have a president who's now talking about docking and paying less to the folks who are now at the most risk. And okay.
And their children are citizens. Their children are born in the United States, and their kids are not receiving any type of benefit, any type of protection either.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a huge issue statewide. So when we look at diversity more generally, we see more diversity typically in the metro area, but across our state, we have our Latinx population. And I remember this back when I was in high school in Southern Oregon. We have our families, our migrant worker families who along the East Coast, the West Coast, they'll be work in California, they'll be work in Oregon, they'll be work in Washington. And so some opportunities also to make sure people are connected and have access to, if they're eligible to become citizens, if they are citizens, to make sure that they vote, because there's a lot at stake. There's a tremendous amount at stake. Other thoughts, Nadia, thoughts on what does accountable, equitable, and safe government look like for East County?
About voting and how some people and some communities, they don't participate. Just yesterday, I was over at one of the Russian stores here in East County, and I chatted a bit with the cashier, and I asked her, hey, the elections are coming up. Have you received your ballot? I'm sorry, my kid is here.
It's Mother's Day. Sorry, we'll take you away from Mother's Day.
No, it's okay. He's just being silly. I apologize. Anyway, and if she received her ballot and if she was gonna vote, and she said no, she didn't even know there was voting happening, election happening. She had no idea. And that is something that needs to change. That is something that students, starting with elementary school, need to be taught how voting important, how it is important to vote, how every single voice, each and every voice needs to be heard and counted, how the future of this country, the decisions that we're making depend on them and their voices. And that's not happening. People just don't use their voices. And That's not right, Pinky. Sorry.
But to this point, this is part of the Secretary of State's job as well. So the election piece, and I talk about election security and election integrity. So the election security, making sure our elections aren't hacked and making sure that ballots are counted. That security piece, not spreading misinformation, that's important. But the election integrity piece is making sure people have access to that information. And so reaching out, again, this is where the partnerships with community-based organizations become so important. Making sure that people know ahead of time, if you are not a citizen, what is the naturalization process? And that's work I did. We had those programs with IRC when I was working for IRC before in refugee resettlement. So what is that process? And it's an expensive process and it's a long process. And actually, I challenge anyone who is a natural born US citizen to take the citizenship exam, because most people will fail it. I can guarantee you that. It's really tough to become a citizen. And so going through that process, then once you are, to know that you have a right to vote. So we have here in Oregon, we have what's called motor voter, and our governor, Kate Brown, really worked on this when she was Secretary of State, so that whenever you interact with the DMV, so if you change your address or you get a driver's license, it automatically registers you unless you opt out to vote. That's really important. I think we should even expand that to any state agency. Once you interact with, you can then become a voter. If you're eligible to vote. So if you, first of all, you know the process, you know how you might become eligible, and then to become a registered voter. But then there's things that we have to change, things like we need to go to same day registration. Even now there's these delays in time, so that even if you sign up to then sign up for a party, there's a lot of confusion around closed primaries. So right now we're going to a primary election day is the 19th. Your ballot has to be received by the 19th. If you're going to mail it in, you should probably mail it at least a week early, because if you mail it but it's not received by election day, it doesn't count. So that's something else we should change. We should have the postmarks count, but also making sure that people understand that to vote in a primary, we have, again, what's called closed primaries, meaning you would need to be registered as a Republican or a Democrat to vote for the nominees for those parties. If you are a registered voter and you are not registered as a Republican or a Democrat, you can actually, in the primary, can still vote. The Independent Party of Oregon has opened up their primary, but it's something, it won't be part of your ballot. You'll need to go online. So you need to Google the Independent Party of Oregon. And actually, Talia, if you're on here, if you could stick that in the comment line. The Independent Party of Oregon lets anyone who's not registered right now as a Republican or a Democrat to go on and vote for the candidate that they prefer. But you need to go online to do it. So it's a slightly different process because this one doesn't go through the Secretary of State. So they're doing that now, and they're using star voting also. So they're using that as exploring that voter preference. So that's something that people can vote even if they're not registered as Republican or Democrat. I'm a Democrat, so if someone was going to vote for me, they would need to be registered as a Democrat, and then for the Secretary of State's race, you need to fill out that bubble. But making sure people understand the process. Also advocating for changes to our system. Another change I think we should do is actually drop the voting age. Nadia, you're talking about engaging kids, helping to learn at an early age. I think we should drop the voting age to 16, because we have our younger leaders who are wanting to step up and engage. We want to make sure that their voices count too, but that will take a change to our Constitution. But being an advocate for some of those changes, I think, is really important. And then overcoming barriers. So whether we were talking earlier about distance learning barriers, making sure that folks can overcome those barriers to having access to their vote is, I think, a really critical thing that we could be doing. What are some of the other challenges that we need to overcome and changes we need to make post COVID-19? Any thoughts now? Nadia and Mario, we've now got you in the same shot. So either of you, that or Dr. Gomez.
We were sharing a charger.
My phone died. Logistic problems.
Sorry,
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Thank you.
That's why the kid was around too. Yeah. What do you think?
So Dr. Gomez, other thoughts about ways that government can be more accountable, especially to folks in East County?
Having representation of all of our communities living here. We still don't have equal representation of all of our communities. I mean, Mario mentioned he's the first Latino to be on city council. I'm the first Latina on our school board. So we do need more representation in all of our branches of government here in Gresham and statewide. And like Nadia was saying, and you mentioned, educating our youth, because our youth is so powerful, and they know that they have the tools, and they are very confident in what they want to do and what needs to be done. It's having that proper guidance and having that mentorship to get them there.
Yeah,
Also,
and it's, yeah, please, Mario.
Also, if possible, the ability for politicians to go out into the community to meet their constituents, to meet people out that are, that want to get involved or want to speak with people in political power that normally they can't. And I think it's important that politicians get out from behind their desk and visit with people.
Yeah, show up.
Yeah.
So how are we developing our future leaders? Because making sure that leadership reflects our communities is critically important to accountable leadership. What work is being done now? What more work can we be doing around developing our future leaders? Because I agree with you that I've had some people say, well, young people don't vote because they don't care. I was like, no, young folks are passionate about what's going on, but just don't feel like we're listening. So how do we, and if we develop them as leaders, they'll take charge. They're ready to go. So what are some of the things we can be doing to better empower our younger and our future leaders?
I would second what Mario said, going out, visiting classrooms. I know every time I'm invited to be a guest speaker at a high school or even elementary school, I go and I try to explain what a school board member is to the younger kids and to the high school kids who do know, and encourage them to follow up. If you're interested, let me know. I'll meet with you. I'll answer your questions. I'll walk you through the process. Having free trainings, like I know Mario mentioned East County Rising. East County Rising trained me. I didn't know how to campaign. I didn't know any of that. I had participated as a volunteer in phone banking and canvassing, but in terms of actually being the candidate, no. I didn't have a clue. So those free trainings and those resources for people who are interested are very helpful.
Also, yeah. I want to add that educating the youth about what being a politician means to start with, because there is a misconception that if you're a politician, then it's something boring, that it's something that, just, those folks up in the government capital that need to do. It's not something that relates to them in any way, but that is so wrong. Politics are exciting. Politics have so many different venues and opportunities, and just educate the youth about how engaging and informative and just plain fun politics could be. Make politics fun.
Yeah,
that's the biggest barrier that I see personally when the youth decides not to get engaged, not to get involved, not to participate. They don't find it fun. They don't find it appealing. And if we make it fun, then they'll show up and they will vote and they will make sure that their voice is heard.
Great point. Another organization that I know is doing amazing work throughout the metro area, but in East County as well, is the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, APANO. Really, I so admire the work they're doing, and their developing of current and future leaders is so critically important. Another thing for young leaders, and we're seeing this a lot, is a response to climate change and having younger leaders stand up and engage statewide. I really appreciate the support I've got from younger leaders who want to see change there. And I really see my job is in part do the work now, and then also, even more importantly, prepare for the future and build up that future generation. In Eastern Oregon, groups like RICE is a great organization. It's this young, dynamic Latinx group of leaders in Umatilla County, and I got to know them in 2018. We were working on the No on 105 campaign together, and it's so inspiring. It's so inspiring to work with and to get to know some of our young leaders. So thank you for all the work that you all are doing. So we're running short on time. What is a good way if folks want to get in touch with you or for additional information? What are some other resources that you can think of that are out there? And Dr. Gomez, why don't we start with you?
Anybody who'd like to follow up with me is through El Programa Hispano website or through the Gresham Barlow School Board District website. My email and phone numbers are on both websites.
Super, thank you so much. Nadia and Mario, what are good ways for folks to follow up with you and get information on the work you're doing or other great resources in the community? Do we lose them? I think they froze up. So what we will do is they have provided us some information as well. So we'll go ahead and stick that on in the comments line for our this live stream. And for the work we're doing, as you mentioned, and as mentioned before, the importance of understanding what government does in the different roles. So we've got information. We've been doing hot topic discussions. We actually got a hot topic tomorrow talking about campaign finance and how people find out more information of where money's coming from. So that's going to be a noon session we're going to be doing. We've had a bunch of live streams talking about these Oregon Voices Roundtable, really working to make sure that voices are heard across our state and really having these conversations we need to be having to understand how do we ensure that government is accountable, what voices are not being heard, and how do we have those conversations. And then also town halls, bringing attention to the candidates who are now running, is stuff we've been doing. So we have them on live stream. They're on our social media at Jamie McLeod-Skinner for Oregon. We also then post them afterwards to YouTube, so folks have access to information as well. And some of the themes we've been talking about today have been coming up in those conversations. I'm running to be Secretary of State to both protect our democracy, to ensure accountable government, and with that new lens of accountability, as we've been talking about today, also to safeguard our natural resources and to help rebuild our economy post-COVID-19, to get us through this time and rebuild stronger and healthier communities again. Dr. Gomez, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. We lost Mario and Nadia a little bit earlier, so technology problems as we were talking about, but I really appreciate their comments as well. And thanks everyone for being engaged. Remember, we have an election right now. If you're a registered Democrat, I'd be honored to have your vote for Secretary of State. If you're not a registered Republican or Democrat, you can still go online with the Independent Party of Oregon, engage in their process. But if you've received a ballot, there are other important races up and down the ballot. So please do vote. Your vote is your voice. And make sure you send in your ballot. If you're going to mail it, I would advise you to mail it at least a week early. It's due on May 19th. And so if it's after, say, Wednesday of this week, you should probably make sure you drop it at a Dropbox to make sure your voice is heard. But thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Gomez, for joining me. Thanks for all your community work. I'm a huge fan and really appreciate all the work you're doing for our future. And to everyone, thanks for joining us. Stay safe. We'll get through this pandemic together, and take care.